You asked what rules would they tighten up? If I were doing it, I would look at counter. Not that I'm saying that counter is a problem. It's just I think that at the moment, counter's kind of punching above its weight. I would look at the average damage of all of those fighters who primarily use counter. So anything that's like very cheap and toughness 5, right? Because those are going to be the main offenders when we're talking about counter. Reason being that it is unlikely that far more expensive fighters would use up one of their actions to do less damage than they would have done anyway by attacking, right? So that's it, right? So those very cheap toughness 4, toughness 5 fighters, I look at them, I look at their average damage that they put out over an attack action. Is it going to be 1 damage? Is it going to be 2 damage? Is it going to be whatever? And I would make it so that counter can never do, or it's very rare, that counter will do more damage than their basic attack action. So the idea is that you should only really be using counter to finish people off, as opposed to it being your main source of damage, right? So I think in reality, what that means is that counter will probably go to a hard cap of, let's say, 3 damage. Most of these toughness 4, toughness 5 guys, it's like 3 attacks on a 1-3 damage profile. So a crit is 3 damage, 3 hits is 3 damage, and there are several ways that you could implement that to make counter basically only do 3 damage maximum. And I think that would go a long way to sorting out counter, especially for some of those weaker, not those weaker warbands, but for the elf profiles, right? And that's really the main problem about the elf profiles. We've been talking about, me and Toast actually, we've been talking about Disciples of Cain recently, because he's been on this Disciples of Cain thing, I think last week or the week before, something like that. Witch elves are not bad. They are at 65 points. They are pointed absolutely fine, right? There's no problem with witch elves at 65. The problem is that they get countered to death and they only have 8 wounds. Suddenly, if counter is only doing maximum 3 damage, then a witch elf at 65 points can run into a thing. Sure, it might only take 3 damage back, but that 3 damage isn't killing it. And over 2 attack actions, the witch elf won't die over 2 attack actions. And that's kind of the long and the short of it. So yeah, that's one thing, how I would tighten up the rules a little bit. Demetrios loves to hate on the weight action. I don't think that there's a problem with the weight action. He is right, though, about hordes. In my experience, right, so I played a couple of different styles of hordes. I played Hunters of Wanchi, I played Tarantulas Brood, and then there are a lot of people who play Soulblight Gravelords. Now, I found when I played Tarantulas Brood that despite me running 15 guys, people kind of didn't mind it was 15 guys. Because that horde just dies. It's like 6 wounds and toughness 1, and it falls over to a paper. It is basically to a breeze. It will fall over like completely. And people didn't mind because it feels like that you're churning through a lot of stuff, and it feels like you're actually getting somewhere. Now, you may not actually be getting anywhere during the game because, you know, the horde gets resurrected, the horde comes back, the horde does whatever. But at least it feels like it. It feels like you're achieving something. And I think that's one of the keys to making hordes, to giving an engaging playstyle to hordes. Your opponent, if they're playing against a horde, needs to think that they're actually doing something and needs to think they're achieving something. You never want to come out of a game and think, okay, well, my opponent had 100 guys and there was nothing that I could do, right? It always has to feel like there's something that you can do. I think the main problem is with those very sticky hordes with a lot of defensive power to them. I'm basically talking about Soulblight Gravelords here. And I think there's definitely a balancing act to be had between putting a lot of fighters on the field and the amount of damage they can do and how long they stick onto the battlefield. Because I don't think the hordes should be as sticky as Soulblight Gravelord hordes are, for example. Because SPGL hordes can basically go, okay, we are all toughness 4, and we all have a reaction that can reduce damage. And by the way, we can all come back to life. And I think that's a problem when we're talking about hordes. I don't necessarily have an issue with a horde that can basically fall over and die, and there's actual counterplay to what they're trying to do. That's why I think there's a lot more time for Royal Beast players, for example, because they can play very large warbands, but ultimately they are made of paper and they need to win in the first couple of turns, and if they don't, they're done. So more paper hordes and less sticky hordes, if you get me. Demetrius brings up the initiative phase. No one wants to basically go into the initiative phase and basically say, oh, my opponent rolled his quad 6 and then his big thing kind of just rolled me and I fell over and I died, right? That's not engaging gameplay. That's not gameplay that has counterplay to it that says, oh yeah, well, I can do something to stop this or I can do something to mitigate this damage. I mean, you can, at like very high levels, you totally can do things to try and stop that from happening. But generally speaking, in your normal games, that's basically not going to happen. And if your opponent has a tyrant that quadra 6s into you, you're basically done, and it can be completely game winning, and it be completely soul destroying. It's basically a similar thing to the horde argument, right? Where's the engaging gameplay in that? There is no back and forth. There is no strategy to it. It's just, oh, I rolled my quad 6 and I win. So I would, if it were up to me, I would remove Rampage from the game. Whenever Games Workshop produces a quad, the question is always, oh, is it better than Rampage? If yes, then it's going to be fantastic. If no, what's the point? I'm just going to use Rampage. So removing Rampage from the game automatically makes other quads, like puts them in contention for doing things. So yeah, I think Rampage is something that needs to be looked at. And then another common argument that I get is that it's kind of linked to that argument is that, oh, it's all down to luck. If you roll your abilities, you roll your abilities. And if you get the abilities you want, you basically win the game. I don't necessarily buy the argument because I think that the initiative phase is one of the more interesting aspects of Warcry, and I think there's a lot of nuance and a lot of skill in there in how you're going to be choosing whether you want to go first or second and that kind of thing. But for newer players, they kind of don't see that, and all they really see is, oh, I roll my abilities. So I don't know, maybe making abilities a little bit easier to generate might be a thing, possibly. But again, there's ups and downs. How far you want to go in making the abilities too easy to make. And then, of course, you'll need like an entire balance update before that, right? Because there are some abilities that if you have access to them every turn, every game, they can be completely like game winning in themselves. There's things like, Calthea, right? Calthea's got, I forget the name of her ability, but if you had access to that, guaranteed every turn, every game, it's kind of a bit much. So yeah, there would basically need to be, any of these changes would basically need a whole points adjustment on everything, because at the moment things are pointed in such a way that they take the scarcity of abilities into account. Those are the two areas that I would tend to look at. Overall though, like Warcry as a game is kind of fantastic and it does exactly what you want it to do. So I wouldn't change all that much if I were put in charge of the game. I wouldn't change all that much at all. I just think it wants like little tweaks, basically. With those little tweaks, I think it could be even better than it is now.